Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to continue covering the best builds for season 11, this time looking at the Bruiser or fighter class of champions in specific. I've already uploaded a video for assassins and mages, so be sure to check those out if you're unsure of what to build on those class of champions. After this, I plan on covering marksman or AD carry next, then tanks and supports, so make sure you do subscribe so you don't miss those uploads. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, one thing you guys should be aware of before we dive into the specific builds for each champion is that Executioners is still a great item if the enemy team has a lot of healing. If you're playing top lane against a Fiora, Darius, Renekton, grabbing one early on is a great idea. You just want to sit on your Executioners till late game though, and when you run out of item slots, you can upgrade it to Gangplank's Chainsword as a 4th or 5th item. I won't be including Executioners in the core builds for any champions in this video because it is situational, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't build it if you do need the healing reduction. And like I've done for the two previous videos, all the champions will be placed in alphabetical order to make it easier for you guys to find a certain champion if you'd like to. So starting things off here with Aatrox, the most consistent build on him right now is a Gore Drinker Rush into Black Cleaver and then Death's Dance. Third item, it can either be Death's Dance or Sterix depending on the situation. If you're up against a lot of AP burst, Sterix is generally better. If you're up against more consistent damage or AD champions, Death's Dance is really good. There's also two other rush items you can go, Divine Sunderer or Eclipse there. Eclipse overall is just really broken right now. It's such a strong item, so you can go it on like a lot of champions honestly, and it can be really good for you. Divine Sunderer into Black Cleaver, if you're looking for more of a tank busting build, you can go for that. So there's a couple different setups you can look to try out on Aatrox. All right, next here for Camille, it's pretty straightforward for her. She's kind of got just two really good builds going around at the moment. Trinity Force, Ravenous Hydra, Death's Dance, that's the one that's most consistent on her. However, you can go Divine Sunderer as well into a Ravenous Hydra and then like a Sterix and Death's Dance, you know, it can be swapped out like I was talking about for Aatrox depending on the situation, but either Trinity into Ravenous or Divine into Ravenous is really strong on Camille, and those are the best, you know, two core builds on her at the moment. Now moving on to Darius, there's three different builds you can look to try out on him right now. Trinity Force into Sterix and Death's Dance is the most popular build on him, but it's actually not the one performing the best. Stridebreaker as a rush item is performing the best right now on Darius. It gives you the lunge along with the slow, which is really good for the champion because it allows for you to stick onto your target even better. You get kited out a lot less easily, so look to try out Stridebreaker rush on Darius if you haven't already into like a Sterix and a Deadman's, and you can also do Gore Drinker, Stridebreaker, and Trinity Force are all viable rush options on the Darius there. Gore Drinker, Death's Dance, Sterix can be a strong build on him as well. So now for Fiora, there's a lot of different builds going around on her. You got Gore Drinker, Ravenous Hydra, Death's Dance. That's gonna be like an insane lifesteal setup right there on your Fiora. Really good dueling potential. You can do Ravenous Hydra Rush into Trinity Force and then Death's Dance. That can work as well. Even Stridebreaker is performing very well on Fiora. You'd think that, you know, she already has a dash in her kit, so she wouldn't really need another one, but you know, an extra dash gives you more outplay potential. Stridebreaker, Ravenous, Death's Dance is a very good performing build on her right now. And if you're looking for more of a tank busting build, you can do a Divine Sunderer into Blade the Ruined King and then a Death's Dance. Moving on to Gangplank now, he's one of the worst performing top laners right now in the preseason. All the changes combined just have not been really good for Gangplank, and one thing a lot of players are doing wrong on him right now is they're rushing Trinity Force. So Divine is just overall the better rush item on Gangplank. It's just the better Trinity Force, so if you are going Trinity Force on GP, I definitely look to swap over to Divine. Divine into Ravenous Hydra and then Sterix is his best performing build. And then you can also go for like a lethality setup, Essence Reaver Rush, so actually rushing a non-mythic item is viable on Gangplank into then lethality with Eclipse and Collector. So those are two different builds you can try out on your Gangplank. Now on the Garen, you've got a bunch of different options. Stridebreaker, Black Cleaver, and then Deadman's is his best performing setup. The Stridebreaker, kind of similar like to what I was talking about on Darius. It's really nice for Garen as well to just prevent you from being kited. The main issue with Garen, right, is getting on top of your target. Once you're on top, you deal a ton of damage, so the Stridebreaker giving you the lunge and the slow is really nice for him. You can also still do the standard Trinity Force, Deadman's, and Sterix. It's not terrible, but it definitely isn't optimal. And then there's also a tank setup of Sunborn Aegis, Black Cleaver, and then Deadman's. You can look to go for that. I don't have it up on screen here, but Stormrazor, even as a second item, Stridebreaker into Stormrazor is performing very well on him. So if you want more of a offensive only setup, a damage focused setup, Stridebreaker into Stormrazor is also another option. So on your Gnar, you have two different build paths right now. If you want more of an offensive build path, you want a carry setup, Trinity Force, Black Cleaver, and Sterix is really good on him right now. And if you want more of a tankier setup, Divine into Deadman's Plate and then Force of Nature is going to work really nicely for you. Alright, so for the Hecarim, his best performing build right now is a Divine Sunder Rush into a Ravenous Hydra and then Sterix. A lot of people are still going for, you know, the old build on Hecarim of Trinity Force, Death Dance, and Sterix. It's not terrible, but Divine Sunder just seems to be the better rush item right now on Hecarim. And there's also just a tanky, just hard engage focus setup you can go as well. Turbo Chem Tank, Deadman's Play, and then Death Dance. If your team is really lacking a tank, lacking a front line, then you can look to go for this build on your Hecarim as well. Now for the Alawi, there's three different builds going around on her at the moment. There's the Gore Drinker, Black Cleaver, Sterix, which seems to be most consistent. It's very popular right now. You can also do Divine into Death Dance and then Black Cleaver, more of a tank busting setup. And then actually the best performing setup on her right now is more of a tankier scaling setup of Frostfire Gauntlet into Manamune and then Sterix. Things are pretty standard, pretty straightforward for Irelia. Nothing has really changed here in Season 11. A Bork Rush, even though it's not a mythic, is still performing best on her into a Trinity Force and then Death Dance. Or if you want, you know, more percent HP damage, if you're up against a tankier composition, you can swap out Trinity Force for Divine Sunder. So Bork, Divine, and then like I've said earlier on, third item can be situational there with Death Dance or the Sterix. So for the Jarvan, two different setups right now. If you want a tankier build path, you can do Sunborn Aegis, Black Cleaver, and then Stoneplate. If you want more of a carry-oriented setup though, you can do Gore Drinker into Death Dance and then Sterix. For the Jax, very similar to Irelia, you can still go for the Bork Rush there into Trinity Force and then Death Dance, really solid on him right now. You can also do a Trinity Force into Ravenous Hydra and then Death Dance. Ravenous Hydra is actually very viable right now on Jax after the changes it got. And then if you want more of a tank busting page, you can do Divine into Blade of the Ruined King and then Sterix Gauge. For Jace, it's going to be Lethality, what's best on him right now. So an Eclipse Rush into Youmuu's and then Edge of Night is really strong. If you do find yourself running into mana issues though, if you want more of a scaling setup, you can do Eclipse into Manamune and then Youmuu's. Now for the Kale, I'm not too sure why I included her in the mage video. Kind of just blanked on including her in that because she is a fighter champion. So the two different builds going around on Kale right now, we already talked about it in the mage video, but Nashor's into Riftmaker and then Deathcap is going to be the AP setup. Really strong on her right now. Kale is one of the best top laners because of that build. And then if you do want to go for AD on Kale, it's definitely not as strong, but if your team is really lacking AD, if the rest of your team is all AP, you can do Kraken Slayer into Ginsu's and then Blade of the Ruined King. And then for the Kayn right now, he's doing very well in the current meta with a lot of tanks being played right now. Kayn's a great pick to counter those tanks, and he does great into them with a Gore Drinker into Black Cleaver and then Death Dance. Really solid setup. Nothing really better right now on the Kayn. Now on Kled, he's got three really different but really good build paths you can go for depending on the situation. If you want a heavy damage focus setup, if you want, you know, a burstier setup, you can go Eclipse, Black Cleaver, Titanic Hydra. If you want more of a sustained setup though, really good 1v1 setup, you can go Gore Drinker into Ravenous Hydra and then Black Cleaver. And if you want a tanky setup, then Sunborn Aegis is just a really good rush item on him right now. It's actually the best performing rush item into Titanic Hydra and then Sterix. You get so much HP from that setup, you're super tanky, but you still deal a ton of damage. On the Lee Sin, there's two different pretty consistent builds on him right now. Either the Gore Drinker into Death Dance and then Black Cleaver. That one's going to make you really tanky there, a lot of HP in that setup. If you want more damage though, you can do Eclipse Rush. It's very strong on him right now into a Black Cleaver and then Death Dance. And if you really want damage, if you want to have some more fun, Eclipse into Youmuu's and Edge of Night. I don't have that one up on screen there, but you can just go full lethality on Lee Sin as well if you want to. For the Master Yi, there's a very strong offensive setup, and then there's more of a defensive build on the champion. So you can do Kraken Slayer into Ginsu's and then Blade of the Ruined King. If you just want a full damage build on the Master Yi, that's really strong on him. If you do want, you know, a more defensive setup, if the enemy team does have a lot of burst on their team, if they have a lot of AP champions, you can do Immortal Shield Bow into Ginsu's and then Wit's End. So that's going to be really good into just heavy burst compositions because the shield you're going to be getting from Shield Bow, and then the magic resist you'll be getting there from the Wit's End. For the Mordekaiser, there's two different builds you can go on him depending on the situation. So Riftmaker, Demonic Embrace, and then Rylai's is going to be a really good team fight setup on him. It's going to keep him really tanky, give him some really good sticking power there from the Rylai's. If you're looking to split push though, if you're looking to 1v1 more, Riftmaker into a Nasher second, and then Demonic Embrace is something you can do as well. Now moving on to Nasus, there's a couple different variations to the setup you can run on him. Divine into Stoneplate and Sterix just seems to be his best performing setup right now. It's really popular in the higher elos, and just the synergy you get there with Stoneplate and Sterix is really good. Both of them provide you with shields now. If you're unaware, Stoneplate now has an active that gives you a shield, so it just makes you super tanky there and very difficult to kill. You can also do Divine into Deadman's and then Force of Nature. That's a really strong build on him. Gives you a ton of movement speed there from Deadman's and Force of Nature, so it's pretty strong in the split push. And really, like, third item on Nasus can always be situational though, right? Because if you're up against a very heavy AP composition, you wouldn't want to go like Deadman's there. You could go like Spirit Visage, so be looking to switch up your second and third items on Nasus depending on the game. Next up here for Olaf, if you want more of a dueling setup, if you want to be really good in the 1v1 there, then Gore Drinker, Death Dance, and Sterix is very strong. It's more of the carry setup. If you want more of a utility setup though, if you want to be tankier on the champion, if your team's really lacking engage in your composition, you can go Chem Tank Rush into a Deadman's and then Death Dance. Now for Pantheon, he's more of a support champion these days, and I've included two different builds there. So if you are playing him as a support, Eclipse into Umbral Glaive and then either Guardian Angel or Black Cleaver third can be really good. If you are still somebody though who plays him in the solo lane, either top lane or mid, you can do Eclipse into Black Cleaver and then Death Dance. That's a really good setup on him as well. Now Rexa is a really interesting champion in the preseason because with the addition of Prowler's Claw and Stridebreaker, it just makes her engages a lot more reliable. If you're unaware, the actives on Prowler's Claw and Stridebreaker give you a dash now, so it means that you're a lot less reliant on having your flash up to engage with Rexa. You can tunnel in, use the dash from Prowler's Claw to get right onto your opponent and then knock them up. So you can go for a more lethality focused setup there, a damage oriented setup of Prowler's Claw into Edge of Night and then Black Cleaver, or you can go for a tankier, more durable setup of Stridebreaker into Black Cleaver and then Sterix. Now for Renekton, you got a couple different choices on him. If you want a really offensive setup, really good 1v1 build, you can go Eclipse into Blade of the Ruined King and then a Black Cleaver or a Sterix as your third item. If you want more of a team fight setup or just a more durable setup there, you can go Gore Drinker into Black Cleaver and then the Sterix. And even Stridebreaker as a rush item is very underrated right now on the Renekton. Just gives you insanely good sticking power there. You've got the dash from your E, and you also have, you know, the slow and the dash from Stridebreaker, so it just gives you the ability to stick onto your target extremely well. For Riven, you do have a couple different builds to choose from here. The one that's performing best right now in high elo is actually a Ravenous Hydra Rush into Gore Drinker second and then Death Dance. That build just overall gives you really good dueling potential. The Ravenous Hydra, after its changes, is a really good item now on Riven, and you actually rush it right now on her, so you don't even go for Mythic first. You just rush the Ravenous Hydra and then you grab your Mythic in Gore Drinker as your second item. You can also rush either the Prowler's Claw or the Eclipse. Both those lethality items do pretty well right now on Riven. The Prowler's Claw with that dash there just gives you insane catch potential and insane like engage range, so you can try out those builds as well on Riven. But once everything settles down, Ravenous, Gore Drinker, Death Dancer, Black Cleaver are likely going to be the best items on Riven. So Set has like 4 or 5 different builds that are really good on him right now. Blade of the Ruined King Rush is doing very well, so like we were talking about earlier for Jax and for Irelia, you can still rush a non-mythic on these champions, and Bork is still a great rush item for the set too. You can go into a Stridebreaker second there and then Death Dance third. That seems to be the most consistent build on him at the moment. The Stridebreaker giving you that lunge just gives Set, you know, these immobile champions a lot more viability, just so much more sticking power. You can also do a Bork into Gore Drinker and the Sterix. That's also very viable. If you're looking for a tankier setup, you can do Sunborn Aegis into Deadman's and then Thormail. And if your team's really lacking engage, if you need to be that engage for your team, if you need to be that front line, you can do a Chem Tank into Deadman's and then Sterix. And then for the Shyvana, she's actually performing a lot better right now in the preseason with either a bruiser setup or a tank setup. AP Shyvana just isn't really doing that great. You don't have as much access to haste now or CDR in your core build on the Shyvana. Night Harvester gives you like 15 haste, but then Nashor's no longer gives you any haste now or no longer gives you CDR. So you're just not able to get 40% CDR super easily anymore on Shyvana. So I definitely look to try out like Bruiser Shyvana. It is actually performing super well. Trinity Force into Bork and then Sterix is a great setup, or if you want a tankier setup to run on her, Sunborn into Titanic Hydra and then Sterix is actually super strong, very underrated, so that's what I definitely look to try out as well. Now for the Skarner, he is definitely like more of a tank champion now, but Riot does have him listed as a fighter or as a bruiser, so I'm going to include him in this video anyways, but the two best builds for him right now are just going basically full tank. So Chem Tank, Deadmans, and then Sterix is going to be really strong on him, and then even Sunborn as a rush item into Deadmans and then Force of Nature. Those are a couple different variations you can look to go on Skarner. And then kind of same thing here for Trundle. If you do want to play him more offensively, you can go Trinity Force, Titanic Hydra, and Sterix. That can work on him for sure, but he's just so much better played as a tank right now in the preseason. Frostfire Gauntlet into Deadmans and Spirit Visage is really strong, and you can even do a Sunborn Aegis into Titanic and Spirit Visage, kind of like a tank and damage mix there. That one can work very well on him. Now, Tryndamere is one of the weakest champions right now overall in the preseason. He's just doing really bad with all the changes to the crit items and just crit in general, but one of the best builds on him right now is Gale Force as a rush item into Navori Quick Blades and then Infinity Edge. It is a pretty underrated one. Not a ton of people are going for it, but it is the one performing best in high elo right now. The other build you can do is Navori Quick Blades into Kraken Slayer and then Infinity Edge, so two different pages you can try out on Tryndamere. And then Udyr's actually seeing some pretty good success right now in preseason. The new item Stride Breaker gives him a lot more viability. Having the lunge from the active on that item allows him to stick onto his targets a lot better. So Stride Breaker into a Bork and then Sterix is his best performing build. You can also look to do Trinity Force into Bork and then Death Dance. Trinity Force isn't terrible on him, but definitely Stride Breaker is a bit more optimal right now. And then if you want to run like a wacky tank setup on Udyr, Sunborn Aegis is viable as a rush item, and then you can do like Demonic Embrace and Deadman's. Demonic Embrace on the Udyr there, just going for this burn setup from the Sunfire and Demonic Embrace can be very strong on him, and it's definitely pretty underrated at the moment. And then for Urgot right now, there's a lot of different builds you can experiment with on the champion. There's like 5 different mythics that are viable for him right now. Gore Drinker as a rush or Divine Sunderer seem to be the two best. So depending on the situation there, if you want more of a tank busting page, you can go Divine into Black Cleaver. If you're up against another Bruiser, you can go Gore Drinker, Black Cleaver into Titanic Hydra. Eclipse Rush there, you can go for that as well. It's a viable option on the Urgot. So if you want, a lethality rush item, you can try Eclipse into Black Cleaver. Stride Breaker as a rush isn't even all that bad either, gives you the lunge there to allow you to stick onto your targets easier. And then I don't have it up on screen, but Kraken Slayer, a lot of people are going for this, and it's not really what I'd recommend if you're trying to win. It's more of a for fun setup, but you can do like a Kraken Slayer into a Black Cleaver and then Death's Dance, and you can try that out on your Urgot as well. For Vi, you can look to experiment with a couple of different things. Trinity into Death's Dance and then Sterix is still really good for her, so if you just want one setup to run every game, you can't really go wrong with that one. Divine into Black Cleaver is a really nice tank busting page you can run there, and then if you do want to play her lethality, it is viable. Probably not the the most optimal, but you can go Eclipse, Youmuu's, and then Black Cleaver if you do want some really good one-shot potential. Now the builds on Volibear right now are kind of all over the place, but they're pretty interesting to say the least. Riftmaker into Nashor's and then Demonic Embrace. You can actually play AP Volibear with these new items and have pretty good success with it. It's not even a troll build, it's actually pretty viable right now. It's performing super well, so if you want a fun new setup to try out, I'd definitely play Voli as AP. You can also do like an engage setup there of Turbo Chem Tank into Deadman's. Divine as a rush item into Death's Dance can be really strong on him, and then if you do want to play him as a full tank, that's also viable. Sunborn Aegis, great rush item on him into a Spirit Visage and then Thornmail. Now there's really just one good build going around on Warwick at the moment, and that's Sunborn Aegis into Death's Dance as your 2 core items, and then Gargoyle Stoneplate as your 3rd there, giving you that shield. It's just a really tanky setup, and you're still going to deal a ton of damage as well with it, so there's nothing really better than that. But if you do want to build like more damage oriented, you can do Trinity Force into Titanic Hydra and Death's Dance. That can work on him too. Now for Wukong, there's a lot of different builds going around on him right now. You can do a Trinity Force into Ravenous Hydra and Death's Dance if you're looking for a very strong dueling setup. If you do want to play him a little bit more tanky though, if you want more durability, playing him for the team fights, you can do Gore Drinker into Black Cleaver and then Sterix, Tank Busting Page, Divine into Black Cleaver and Sterix. And if you want to play him lethality, completely viable as well, probably not the most optimal, but you can do Eclipse, Black Cleaver, and Edge of Night. On Xin Zhao, either a Trinity Force Rush into Bork and then Sterix can work very well, and I think that one's gonna probably end up being just the standard build you go in most games once everything settles down. Eclipse though, with how strong it is right now, can be a rush item on him. You can go Eclipse into Bork and then Death's Dance if you're looking for like a super strong 1v1 setup. Alright, moving on to Yasuo now. 3 pretty viable builds you can go on him. Ginsu's into Immortal Shield Bow and then Bloodthirster. That's the most popular right now in the higher elos and it's performing pretty good. You can do Shield Bow Rush though into Phantom Dancer and then into Infinity Edge. That also works very well. And then more of an expensive setup, but actually the best performing setup right now on him is Immortal Shield Bow into Infinity Edge and then Bloodthirster. And then for the Yone, exact same thing as Yasuo, so you can look to try out these 3 different builds on the champion too. And then finally here to round things out, the 40th and final champion in the video is going to be Yorick. So right now he can do well with either Divine or Trinity Force Rush, but like I've talked about for a bunch of other champions earlier on, it just seems like champions that can go Trinity Force just do better with Divine right now. So Divine Rush is performing better. Try that out if you haven't yet. So Divine into Sterix and Death's Dance, or you can do Trinity Force into Sterix and Death's Dance. If you want more of a tankier setup there, then you can do Divine into Deadman's and Force of Nature. Alright, so that is going to be all for the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy, and hopefully this does help you out, give you more of a clear path as to, what you should be building right now in the preseason. So if you guys did enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.